The White House and the whistleblower. New developments in the complaint over President Donald Trump's phone call with the leader of Ukraine. We have reports and analysis. Battle over the border. The Trump administration wants to lower the number of refugees admitted to the country next year. What Catholic groups are saying. Spending bill. New details in lawmakers' attempt to pass a budget to keep the government open. And the beauty of faith. Analysis of a painting depicting one of the doctors of the church. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, September 27th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. President Donald Trump denounces anyone who might have informed a whistleblower as close to a spy and suggests they engaged in treason. The president also questions if the whistleblower who sparked an impeachment investigation is actually a partisan operative. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. President Trump continues to defend his call with Ukraine's president when he asked for Joe Biden and his son to be investigated. The president says it was a perfect call. And today the White House is reacting to that whistleblower, a reported CIA officer who first brought all of this to light.
The president is always concerned when people are possibly leaking information that they shouldn't, if it includes national security or sensitive or highly classified information.
In audio released by the Los Angeles Times yesterday, the president was heard saying whoever gave the information to the whistleblower was comparable to a spy. He goes on to talk about how in the old days, spies used to be handled a little differently, implying that they would be put to death. The whistleblower's complaint says the transcript of President Trump's call with Ukraine's president was put into a highly classified system here at the White House to keep it more hidden. But the White House says the document was already classified, so it did nothing wrong by moving it into that system. Wyatt?
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. Congress heads home where lawmakers will face voters' questions about impeachment. They're on a 2-week recess for the Jewish holy days. It's been a roller coaster week of Speaker Nancy Pelosi officially launching an impeachment inquiry. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi joins us with more. Jason?
Wyatt, Speaker Pelosi tells Democrats they need to strike while the iron is hot. Democrats see this whistleblower's complaint as finally gaining the attention of the American people. And some lawmakers even think they could vote this year to impeach President Trump. But not all Democrats are on board with this impeachment investigation. And today, I spoke to one of them.
I want to get the facts. I think just like any other member here, they're very troubled by a lot of the allegations that are out there, troubled by what was in the transcript and what's in the whistleblower's report. And we have a lot more facts that we have to get.
Democrat Anthony Brindisi represents a New York district Donald Trump won by 16 points. He says he's seen a spike in phone calls from those in favor and against impeachment, about 750 calls this week. Republicans predict Democrats will see a backlash, question the now public whistleblower complaint.
He had no firsthand knowledge. He wasn't on the call. Everything is second and third hearsay. And then his motivation was he didn't like the president. And when the Inspector General tells you there was an indicia of arguable political bias, that's a Washington way of saying this guy didn't like the president.
The Inspector General for Intelligence found the whistleblower's complaint was credible, but the inspector did find indications the person supported a different political candidate. The AP reports that whistleblower was a CIA officer. 2 committee chairmen are writing the White House to demand to know why President Trump originally withheld aid to the Ukraine. That's part of this whistleblower's complaint. If the House votes to impeach President Trump, it will go to the Senate for a trial. And in the past, the House impeached 2 presidents, Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton, and in both instances, the Senate acquitted those presidents. Wyatt?
Correspondent Jason Calvi reporting from Capitol Hill. Thanks, Jason. And joining me now to offer his analysis is Matthew Continetti, founding editor of the Washington Free Beacon. Matthew, welcome back to the program. Quite a week here in Washington. What do you make of this whole whistleblower complaint? Smoking gun, or is it just more partisan politics?
Well, I think it's the biggest threat yet to Donald Trump's presidency, mainly because we do have the realistic possibility now that he will be impeached by the House of Representatives. There's a lot of unknowns. I often think of what General David Petraeus said before the 2003 Iraq War when he asked someone, tell me how this ends. I don't think anyone in Washington knows how this inquiry launched by Nancy Pelosi to such fanfare this week ends.
New polling out seems to indicate that support for the impeachment proceedings against President Trump is growing among Democrats, Republicans, even independent voters all alike. How do you think this is resonating with the American public?
Well, it's hard to tell because things have happened very rapidly, and we still haven't had time, I think, for the public to kind of assimilate all the charges and countercharges. So we have definitely known for a while that Democrats, by supermajorities, have wanted to impeach this president. Mm-hmm. The problem has been they've never been able to settle on the thing which they would impeach him over.
Mm-hmm. They know they don't like him. They know they want to impeach him just about finding.
This is it.
Okay.
This will be the thing, because you can see Pelosi wouldn't have launched this inquiry if she had not been confident that a majority of her caucus would support an investigation into the whistleblower complaint. So what's fascinating to me about this is they've yet to say that Donald Trump has violated any statutes with this phone call. Instead, I think what they're going to do is impeach him on a larger abuse of power, abuse of office charge.
Very interesting. Lawmakers now head home for 2 weeks, but House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff says his panel will be working through the recess. What does that signal to you, if anything, about the pace of this impeachment inquiry?
Well, I think Democrats learned a lesson from the Mueller flop, which was that if they allow this process to go on for too long, they risk dissipating the energy, they risk letting down their core supporters, and they also allow the president, who has a huge megaphone, to commandeer the narrative and get his arguments out there. So that's why you kind of see a rush to judgment. You saw a rush to judgment even before the transcript of the call was released, even before the complaint was released this week. Already then, the Democrats were saying, we are prepared to launch this impeachment inquiry over this issue. Once we have all this data now, I think individuals can assess for themselves whether the contents of the call rise to the level of impeachment of the President of the United States. Given what we know now, I think we're going to be once again polarized into our two opposite camps. I don't see Republicans shifting in a pro-impeachment direction based on what we know now.
I think you might be onto something there. I don't think this is going to be solved easily enough, and we'll just see how it affects the election in 2020 as well. Matthew Continetti, founding editor of the Washington Free Beacon, thanks so much for your analysis.
Thank you.
The Trump administration proposes cutting the number of refugees allowed into the country next year to a record low. Administration officials yesterday said they would like to cap the number of migrants admitted to the United States to 18,000, roughly 30% lower than last year. The plan for the upcoming fiscal year includes 5,000 slots for religious minorities, but one Catholic humanitarian group strongly disagrees with the proposed decrease. In a statement, Catholic Relief Services says, "We all want to end conflict and violence so families can safely remain in their countries of origin. But in the meantime, as the richest country in the world, we need to do our part to help those most vulnerable displaced refugees." The Senate sends a spending bill to President Trump that would keep the government open until November 21st. The measure buys additional time for lawmakers to debate $1.4 trillion in annual spending bills. It passed by an 82 to 15 vote. It now heads to the White House. President Trump is expected to sign it. A federal judge says religious-based adoption agencies in Michigan will be allowed to refuse to place children with same-sex couples. The state had banned faith-based agencies from excluding same-sex couples, but the judge said that initiative was an attempt to stamp out religious beliefs. And in Tennessee, the trial over the state's 48-hour waiting period for abortions has ended. A federal judge will now determine whether to uphold the measure. It requires women to make trips to an abortion clinic at least 48 hours apart. Attorneys for the clinic say the law has no benefits. The state says it allows women the chance to more fully consider their decision. A state in Mexico becomes the second jurisdiction in the country to legalize abortion. The area of Oaxaca now allows for abortion during the first 12 weeks of pregnancy. Previously, it was legal only in Mexico City. And in Australia, lawmakers in New South Wales voted yesterday to make abortion legal up to 22 weeks. The move overturns a 119-year-old measure. Previously, it was legal only if doctors found a woman's physical and mental health was in danger. Abortion now is legal in all but one state in Australia. Protesters in Hong Kong hold a rally against police brutality. Demonstrators flashed laser pointers against a government building today. Lasers have been used to try and damage security and surveillance cameras. Protesters also held up 5 fingers to signify the number of demands they're making of the government. Hong Kong has been the site of several months of pro-democracy demonstrations. Pope Francis urges an ethical approach to technology. He made the comments during a meeting with participants of a conference on the digital age. It's taking place at the Vatican and is sponsored in part by the Pontifical Council for Culture. For more on today's meeting, we're joined by Bishop Paul Tai, the Secretary of the Pontifical Council for Culture. Your Excellency, you met with the Holy Father today. Can you sum up his message and his advice on how to use technology well?
I think the interesting thing about the meeting today was that the Pope first and foremost was giving a welcome to a very diverse group of people coming from technical backgrounds, people coming from legal backgrounds, sociologists, theologians, ethicists. And he welcomed the diversity of the group in terms of the need to encourage different sorts of expertise to come together to ensure that the potential of technology to be of real benefit to humanity is achieved. And that's going to require the cooperation and the engagement of people from a broad range of specialization. So he wanted to give a word of encouragement for all of us to think and to see the potential of technology, to ensure that that technology is shared with all, particularly the poorest of our societies. And then a couple of little points he was inviting theologians. He said, look, you're looking at something new. You can't look to the tradition for old answers. You have to have creative fidelity. We have to find in our tradition answers and indications and values that will help us to make the most of these new technologies.
Let me follow up with you a little bit on that last point, because you work on issues of culture. Tell me a little bit more in general about the connection between culture and technology.
Yeah, I worked until about 3 or 4 years ago in the area of communications, and we did a lot of work on digitalization and on helping the Vatican to adapt to the use of digital technologies for communications. But in that context, I became interested on the cultural impact of digitalization, meaning that a technology that had the potential to teach all of us or to help all of us to communicate better, to be closer to each other, to learn from each other by, in a sense, by reinforcing the unity of the human family, by allowing us to talk across distances and across languages, that sadly that technology often led to a polarization, that we've seen that civil discourse, political discourse, culture in general has become somewhat polarized.
I'm wondering if you could think of any more concrete examples, as little things, about what are just some of the positives in technology that the church sees and churches view.
Yeah, I think the way you see that at times is I've seen situations in which the diffusion of images by technology has helped maybe to change a discourse. One of the things here in Europe was the Pope very early on went to visit immigrants. And really they were moments for him to give a face to the immigrants. Very often people are frightened of those who are different, those who are coming from different places. In the Pope meeting with immigrants and then those images being disseminated and got out there by social media in particular, he put a face on people so that we're not as frightened of those who seem different. We learn to hear their stories. So one of the things where I see technology has a particular benefit in the cultural space is in helping us to hear each other's stories, to learn about each other, to learn about our mutual richness.
Well, it's so interesting, as always, to hear about some of these issues, whether it be digital technology, artificial intelligence, and obviously to get this perspective from the church's point of view. Bishop Paul Tai of the Pontifical Council for Culture, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Coming up, a first-hand account of what life is like in the Amazon for Catholics, ahead of the Vatican's meeting on the region. Catholics in the Amazon are grateful Pope Francis and other church leaders will be focusing on the challenges they face during the upcoming Synod in the Vatican. One indigenous leader in the region recently told journalist Inez San Martin he sees the meeting of bishops as a great opportunity. The so-called Synod Fathers will be discussing how the church can better serve the faithful in the Amazon. Inez is Rome Bureau Chief for Crux, a digital outlet focusing on Catholic news and analysis. She joins us now from Rome. Inez, you were in the Amazon earlier this month reporting in Ecuador and Brazil. You talked to many people there. What did you learn?
I learned many things, but the first one I have to say, Wyatt, is the fact that at the end of the day, most of those who profess the Catholic faith in the Amazon region don't actually have the proper care that you would find in any Catholic church in the United States. It's very easy for Catholics in the US or even for me in Rome to go to Mass every Sunday. Most of the people I met don't actually see a priest more than once a year.
Very interesting. Well, as you know, the Amazon is a massive region of about 4 million people, hundreds of indigenous groups. Can you give us an idea of what life is like there for Catholics who may not be able to go to a church or see a priest regularly?
It's very different to what we're used to. First of all, most of the communities I actually had the chance to meet were some 4, 5, 6 hours away from the largest cities, most of them by boat or even small planes that fit only 4 or 5 people. Their life is, as I said, it's very different to what we're used to, because what they have every Sunday, for instance, in the lucky cases, they have the liturgy of the word that is conducted by a lay catechist, which is one of the many reasons why Pope Francis has urged for this upcoming Synod of Bishops that's going to be addressing the church's situation in the Amazon region, to try to see what can be done to better minister to these people who want to receive the sacraments every Sunday, but as I said earlier, only get to do that once a year.
In your view, why is it important for the Universal Church, the Catholic Church, to understand what is happening in the Amazon right now?
First of all, because as you mentioned, Wyatt, the Catholic Church is universal. It's part of our job, it's part of our faith to know what's going on with the Catholic Church around the world. And just like we, for instance, tend to care a lot about what's happening with Christians in the Middle East who are victims of genocide, I believe it's part of the Catholic faith to also try to understand what is happening in some of these very remote communities that have been receiving the gospel, that have been witnessing Christ in their own ways ever since, Spain first arrived to the Amazon region, or Portugal first arrived to the Amazon region in the early 1600s and 1700s. And they haven't yet had the opportunity to, for instance, see what a cathedral looks like, because they never had, in most of these communities, an actual Catholic church with 4 walls and a roof.
185 people, including a handful of non-Catholic experts, will take part in a synod. Some Catholics are critical of some of the issues being discussed, such as ordaining married men. Do you expect fireworks? Do you expect some controversy?
Well, there always are when it comes to a Synod of Bishops being organized by or being summoned by Pope Francis. He found a really a unique way to make sure that this Synod of Bishops, that tended to be a little bit of a snoozer here in Rome, to actually become global news, and not only for Catholic outlets, but also for big outlets like the New York Times. It has to be said, however, that the possible ordination of married men into the priesthood that is being discussed is not really at the center of what the Synod of Bishops on the Amazon region is, but how do we actually, as a Catholic Church that is universal and it's at its core, actually minister to everyone and not just to those who have easy access to a priest every week.
As you know, the faithful in the Amazon are not often covered by the mainstream media, so we're happy to be able to talk about them and get some insight into what is going on in the region. Inez San Martin, Rome Bureau Chief for Crux, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Up next, the beauty of faith as we approach the feast day of St. Jerome. Monday marks the feast day of St. Jerome, a priest, monk, and doctor of the Church. St. Jerome is also renowned for his scholarly work in translating the Bible into Latin. Visitors to the nation's capital can view a painting of St. Jerome. It's just one of the highlights featured in a new exhibit of works by Italian artist Andrea Del Verrocchi at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. Joining me now to talk more about that painting and the importance of the exhibit is Jim Sullivan, author of The Beauty of Faith. Jim, welcome back to the program. Always good to see you. So the church prepares to celebrate the Feast of St. Jerome on Monday. Tell us a little bit more about this painting, which is going to be the first thing in this exhibit that we're looking at today.
Yes, Wyatt. The Italian Renaissance was a rebirth of the art, culture, philosophy, literature of classical antiquity. And St. Jerome was held in high esteem in the Renaissance because he was the one who translated the Bible from the classical languages of Hebrew and Greek into Latin, what we call the Latin Vulgate. St. Jerome is quoted as saying, "Ignorance of Scripture is ignorance of Christ." And so here we see him in this beautiful image, looking up to the heavens. He's sort of very serious look, but he's looking up to the heavens for inspiration as he continues his work of translating the Bible into the language of the Roman Church.
So fascinating. Of course, this is just one work depicting an important church figure. Tell us more about this exhibit at the National Gallery of Art and why it's a must-see, do you think?
You know, Andrea del Verrocchio was a true Renaissance man in the sense that he was a sculptor, a painter, and a goldsmith. But his most striking contribution to the Renaissance was as the teacher of some of the most talented artists of his day. So artists like Botticelli and Ghirlandaio, Perugino, and the genius Leonardo da Vinci all looked to Verrocchio as their master and teacher. So this is a must-see exhibit because it gathers, not only because it gathers for the first time some 50 works of art by Verrocchio, most of which are sacred art, that is sort of a visual catechesis, right, for the faithful. But it also allows us to see the impact and influence of this great master teacher on a whole generation of artists of the Renaissance.
Okay, so let's take a look at another piece of art here. We're looking at a painting next called Tobias and the Angel. Tell us a little bit about this one.
Sure, this painting is a wonderful collaboration of the teacher and student because it is thought to be the work of both Verrocchio and Leonardo da Vinci and his assistants. It captures the lovely story, the beautiful, poignant story in the Old Testament of the blind Tobit who sends his young son Tobias on a journey to collect a debt. It was a dangerous journey, and Tobias finds that the archangel Raphael is right beside him, accompanying him, protecting him, but also giving him a cure for his father's blindness. Notice that everything in this painting is moving, right? There's the wind sweeping across the composition, and the lavish use of gold in the clothing of both the archangel and the young Tobias. It is thought that the curls of the dog, the wavy hair of the dog, as well as the eyes and the scales of the fish is the work of Leonardo da Vinci. This biblical scene was popular in 15th century Florence because merchants often sent their sons on these long, dangerous journeys, and so they hoped and prayed that their sons would also have the same protection of the Archangel Raphael.
I love Renaissance art. This stuff is great, I think. Tell me, when you think about Renaissance art and that time period that you're talking about, there are so many paintings, but there's also different ways of portraying the Madonna and Child. So we're going to look at another painting right here, version of that. Tell us a little about this one.
So this is one of two paintings of the Madonna and Child. This is one of two paintings that was universally accepted as the work of Verrocchio. Look at the faces and the figures of Mary and the baby Jesus. They have weight, they have volume. It is as if Verrocchio has translated the three-dimensionality, the solidity of sculpture into canvas through paint. We see the piercing blue eyes of the child Jesus and his gold-streaked curly hair, but that innocent, lifelike expression of reaching out with both his hands to his mother. And then the serene face and the delicate pose of Mary's left hand as she holds the baby Jesus. To me, this is just a wonderful expression, a tender expression of the relationship of the baby Jesus to his mother Mary.
Very inspiring spiritually. Let me get to this last one here real quick because we're running out of time, Jim, but we have a bust of Christ from the exhibit as well. Sculpture piece.
That's right. Verrocchio was really a master sculptor, responsible for recovering some of the sculptural techniques from the ancient world. In this terracotta bust of Christ, we see this perhaps one of the most powerful sculpted images of Jesus from the Renaissance. We see Jesus' serene face. He is radiating his divinity as the Son of God. And we see his hair, it frames his face, and his eyes now look downward at us, the viewer. I think that one cannot stand in front of this bust of Christ, this image of Christ, and not be moved somehow by the beauty of the incarnation as the eternal Word of God becomes flesh in Jesus.
Like I said, it's also fascinating to me and obviously very welcoming spiritually. Jim Sullivan, always great to have you on the program, author of The Beauty of Faith. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Wyatt.
And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll be back Monday on the Feast of St. Jerome with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.